Monsta Creepypasta.
Welcome to Scary University, and in today's episode, I will be telling you a terrifying creepypasta sci-fi story about 3 police officers who have to take on a horde of bloodthirsty humanoid monsters at an abandoned housing development up in the mountains. Will they survive, or will they all perish? Well, you'll have to listen to find out. My name is Officer Tammy Braxton, and this is my written confession of what took place at the abandoned Moccasin City, which is what my colleagues and I call the place. It is a huge but old town that sits alone in a wooded area close to the Mount St. Elias Mountains in Alaska, which is out in the middle of nowhere, and it was built next to a river that is in the shape of a snake, hence the name. And it is a place that has gotten a bad rep over the years, especially when rumors of it being haunted with spirits and demons started making their way into the ears of the people who lived nearby, which made a lot of explorers go there in hopes of catching something paranormal on camera. But that's when things would begin to take a turn for the worst, when people would enter the town and never come back out, which is when hell would be brought to both mine and my partner's lives. And that is the day we pulled into Moccasin City. No one knows what happened to the people that used to live there, only that everyone just disappeared one day, which caused no one else to want to move there, and I don't blame them. Especially since I now know what possibly caused those people to go missing, and given them terrible fates. And this is how. It was July the 2nd, 2018, when me and my partner, Officer David Bryan, were sitting at a rest stop interviewing a trucker who had been robbed by a prostitute. Yes, you heard me right. He claimed that he was just giving her a lift when she ended up holding him at gunpoint, then robbing him for $700 in cash before fleeing the scene. But Bryan and I didn't buy his story and knew why she was really with him. But since we had no evidence or the prostitute to question, we just took the truck driver's statement and let him go as we went back to our car, where we would laugh about the situation. I mean, come on. The guy clearly wanted the money back that he used to pay the hooker with. It wouldn't take an intelligent person to figure that one out. But our time of laughter and jokes about the situation would be interrupted once dispatch came over the radio, where the dispatcher would instruct us to drive up to Moccasin City because more hikers had gone missing, this time being a group of high school kids who haven't been heard from for over a week. So Bryan and I would both glance at one another with looks of exhaustion, dreading the almost 2-hour drive to the very spot Moccasin City is located. But since the case involved teenagers, we didn't hesitate to start up our cruiser and head up there. It was a long and boring drive, but we would eventually make it to the town at nightfall, where we were greeted by another officer named Dwight Perry, who met us just outside of the old community where he was parked. So me and Officer Bryan got out of our car and walked over to him to see why he was there. He said that he was also instructed to go there to assist us with trying to locate the missing teens, which made me feel much better knowing that another cop would join us on our search. I guess you could say that it was the fact that I am a woman that made me glad that 2 male officers had my back instead of one. So the 3 of us got back into our cruisers and drove the rest of the way into the town until we found ourselves in the center of it and right in front of a massive house, which was the biggest around that still looked livable. I mean, the place didn't look to be in bad shape at all. It just had vines growing up it and was a bit dirty. So we decided that it would be there where the 3 of us would start our investigation. So we did the usual, which was radio back to base, letting them know that we had arrived to our destination before climbing out of our vehicles, where we would walk inside of the massive house that turned out to be still furnished, but covered in cobwebs and dust. And it's there that we will begin to look around with our flashlights while shouting out to make our presence known. But of course, we wouldn't get a response, and only the sounds of our own voices would go ringing through our ears. But it wouldn't take long before we would find the most eerie and terrifying thing as we were searching the house. And that's when we would come across a dried puddle of blood in the center of the floor, in which I'm assuming was a playroom, since there was old arcade machines in it, along with modern day systems and a huge flat screen TV. But due to the bodily fluid in the floor, I'm sure whoever it belongs to wasn't having much fun in that room. And it scared me to think that the blood could have belonged to one of the missing teenagers. So Brian, Perry, and I decided to call it in. But for some reason our walkie-talkies wasn't working, and all we could hear was static coming through them when we tried to reach dispatch. So the three of us decided to go back out to our cruisers to call in our finding. But that is when our lives will be changed forever, but for the worst. Because once we opened the front door to the house and stepped out on its porch, we would first hear the shouts of someone screaming for us to go back inside, which after shining our flashlights on him would turn out to be an old man who was yelling at us from a window of the house across the street as he was pointing further down the road. And the second thing that would happen was when we would see what he was pointing at, once we looked in the direction the man was directing us to look in. And that was the moment we would see a horde of demonic-looking humanoid creatures rushing towards us in a threatening manner, with their sharp fangs showing as drool poured from their mouth. And there was a lot of them. And it was their presence that made the three of us not hesitate to rush back inside and lock the door as we pulled our guns along with our flashlights before rushing to secure the house by locking the other doors and windows. And after we were done moving furniture to cover entry points and barricaded the doors, we went upstairs to try and communicate with the older man across the street, who thankfully was still at the window, but this time with him was two of the missing teenagers that turned out to be one boy and one girl, who both would tell us that they are the only survivors out of their group that used to be that of 8 people, before they would go on to say what had happened to their friends. They claimed that they weren't in the old abandoned town very long and just had went to the massive house Perry, Brian, and I are in, but didn't make it inside before they would hear the screams of one of their female friends as they witnessed one of those creatures dragging her away using its mouth that it had bit down on her neck as it crawled away with her. And not long after, more of those demonic crawling monsters would show up where they would attack and begin eating the rest of their friends. Shocked by what they had told us, I could do nothing but try and comfort them from a long distance, having no way to physically hug them due to the sinister looking beasts that stared up at us from the ground. I mean, they didn't even move. They just sat there looking at me, Brian, and Perry, and also everyone across the street as we all stood at the upstairs windows. Perry, the bravest out of the three of us, would suggest that we shoot at the creatures to try and have them run off so we can make our escape. But it would turn out that whatever they are no animal that would be scared by gunfire, because once we did shoot at them, the ones we hit would drop dead, causing the others to jump on them and eat the bodies, but none of those things would run away. They would remain still like alligators waiting for their prey to get in the water. It was madness, and the reality of those things began to hit me hard. I mean, what the hell are they? I didn't know. And I couldn't believe what was happening to us. I mean, we just had arrived to the old town, not expecting to find anything, not even the missing high school kids, let alone some sort of goblin-like beings looking to tear into our flesh like a pack of hyenas. And the sudden hit of anxiety and fear caused me to almost black out, and I could also see the worry on both Brian and Perry's faces as well. But thanks to my 2 colleagues, who were communicating with me about coming up with a plan, I snapped out of my hypnotic state and would respond to them by telling them that we need to search the house for something we could use to try and distract the very threat on the outside. So us officers yelled over to the people in the house across the street to tell them to stay put, while the 3 of us went back downstairs to strategize a plan, and it wouldn't take long before Officer Brian would come up with a crazy and possibly suicidal idea involving propane tanks. He said that we can throw the tanks next to those things and shoot them as a way to try and kill them all. But knowing the risk of such a huge explosion, I told Officer Brian that we could use his plan as a last resort. I mean, being blown up is much better than being eaten alive by man-eating beings unknown to the human population. Wouldn't you agree? But it wouldn't be Brian's idea we would go with, but it would be the brainchild of Officer Perry we would try out, since he came up with the idea of using the 5 bottles of liquor we found, along with the butane we discovered in a cabinet, to create fire bombs and torches in order to try and get past the beasts waiting for us to return outside, so we can make it to the 3 survivors seeking our help. But in order to see if our plan would work, we first had to waste one of our firebombs by tossing one out of the upstairs window and into the horde below. I mean, it would have to work, because there isn't a creature on Earth that doesn't fear fire, right? Well, the three of us would shout over our plan to the three across the street, along with words of encouragement for them to be strong. Then we would give it a shot, and would go on to toss a firebomb directly into the large group of bloodthirsty monsters, which thankfully had them all scattering to avoid the flames. After being successful with our experiment, we didn't ease up a bit. We yelled over to the old man to get ready to let us in the house him and the others were in, before we ran downstairs, clearing the barricade away from the door, where we would all take a deep breath in before lighting up our torches, then throwing the door open to exit the house. We then rushed outside, only to be greeted by the evil presence of those things that at times tried to grab a hold of us, only to be warned off by the torches we swung at them, which was enough to keep them at bay, as we made it to and inside of the house the others were in. But so would those creatures that forced their way inside before we could close the door, where they would unfortunately grab the old man and my best friend and partner of 5 years, Officer Brian, who they would pull back out of the house, where their screams could be heard until they wasn't. So the 4 of us that remained barricaded ourselves in the basement, where we would all mourn the loss of 2 lives for at least an hour, where even I was pouring tears, while also trying to come up with a new escape plan. But something unexpected happened, and we didn't realize it until they had returned, and that was that they all had disappeared for a while after taking the old man and Brian, only to return an hour later covered in blood. And as I sat there staring at them through the tiny basement windows, I would then realize that they most likely had taken their 2 victims back to their lair to consume them, and wasn't worried about us until they came back. And that's when it hit me, the thought of a sacrifice, so not all lives would end that night, and I was willing to be the one to die, so the other 3 could make it to one of our police cruisers and flee to safety. But after revealing my plan to Officer Perry and the 2 teenagers, it would be Perry who would offer to sacrifice himself instead of me, since I had a young son at home and a husband waiting for me to return. And he had no one. And even though how messed up it may have been, Officer Perry would do the unthinkable in order to save the rest of our lives, when he would cut his right arm, causing a long gash to appear as blood gushed from it, before removing the barricade and opening the basement door, where he too would be taken by the monstrous horde. The 3 of us that remained cried harder than we ever could, but did manage to make it to my car, but not until I unloaded the rest of the firebombs and my handgun's bullets into them, as they were carrying Officer Perry's body away, and I had done so in a fit of rage, before we got in my car and made our escape. And the long ride back felt like I was driving through hell, because the only thoughts in my head was of those who had been killed, and knowing that there was nothing I could have done about it kept my mind restless. But if I could save a life by urging anyone and everyone not to go to Moccasin City, then please heed my warning that you too just may end up being the food source for a horde of hungry monsters.